Good morning, everyone. All right, thank you. So glad to see all of you here today. For those of you who I may not have had the good fortune of meeting, I am Sarah Agassi, the General Manager for your Land Use and Environment Group. And I am honored to be here today with you. The leadership development model is something that I truly believe in. I feel that as we grow within an organization and as leaders, it's not solely about our technical skills. Those will get us to a certain point. But what truly makes us succeed is those, what I will refer to as the soft skills. Those skills that are going to help us build those interpersonal relationships, whether it's with colleagues or it's with those stakeholders and customers and the members of the public that we interact with on a daily basis, the problem-solving skills that we need to use each and every day so that those tough issues that are presented to us as public servants, we're able to collectively work together and come up with the solutions. And that's really what the leadership development model is all about. I know that you've had one session already, is that right? So you are familiar with the leadership development model. If I were to quiz you right now, you would know it all. I'm not going to be doing that. I just want to share with you that those case studies or examples that you're going to be hearing about today are tremendous demonstrations of how we use these leadership soft skills to really be able to tackle those tough situations or those challenges that we want to always embrace as opportunities. And what's going to be highlighted for you is that it takes a village. And the more we understand that we are better when we are collectively working together, where we're bringing different skills to the table, and as a team with that shared vision, mission, and goal, accomplishing those facets that we see as challenges, and yet once we're able to overcome them and come up with the solutions, we can look at it and say, wow, the impact that we've had on the community is much larger than if I were to have tried to tackle this on my own. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ann Kaye, who is a tremendous partner for us within the Land Use and Environment Group. She is part of our team, and it wouldn't be the same without her. So, Ann.
Good morning. Well, Sarah's so nice. She says, I'm not going to quiz you. I am. So, welcome. I'm really excited to be back. We talked about this at the last meeting, that this was going to be the first of two that you're going to have in a series of learning the leadership model and the competencies. And so basically what I want to do is just have you recollect how we did the Jeopardy game. Did you guys like the Jeopardy game? Yeah? Good. It was fun for me, so that's good. So when we talk about the leadership model today, I want you to think about not only the competencies, but I want you to get into the behaviors. And so we're going to do this a little bit differently. We're going to have two amazing panels come up and talk about challenges that they've gone through. And Sarah laid out a great framework for this because they are huge challenges, huge challenges. So what they're going to do is they're going to tell you their story. They're going to talk about what occurred, how they handle it, what they did, who they teamed up with. And what I want you guys to do is you'll see that not only you have your plastic, right? You have your plastic model, but we've also provided you with this. And what this is for, this is your little worksheet. And so what I want you to do while you're listening to the presenters tell their stories, I want you to be checking off the different competencies and the behaviors that they're demonstrating as they go along. And so we built in breakpoints in this for them to stop in their story, and then we're going to turn it to you and talk to you and say, where are they? What did they do? What kind of leadership competencies did they demonstrate? What do they need to? And we'll just have a conversation going from there. How's that sound? So if you partner up, say hello to the person next to you. That's your partner. Congratulations. Good. All right. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce the first panel.
Thank you, Ann. So I'm Clay Wessling, PDS Deputy Director, and with me on the panel today is Keith Kieser, DEH Program Coordinator, to my left, and to my right Reagan Savala, Deputy Counsel from County Counsel, and then Ken Melton, he's a CEO, Code Enforcement Officer with PDS. So we're going to start out the presentation today, and you may be asking, why am I showing photos of children's books in our presentation? Well, each code compliance case is kind of like one of these books. These books come with a warning, and in the world of code compliance, it could come with a warning too. So there's many ways to approach our work and many decision points along the way, and if you aren't careful, you could end up falling down a hole to your death or being eaten by a monster. In real-world county terms, that means ending up in the media or in litigation if you don't choose wisely. So as we go through our presentation, we're going to tell you a story about how we approached navigating a difficult codes case that was an illegal RV park and how we navigated it to compliance. And as we move forward, we're going to be looking to you, the audience, to look at some of our choices and then explain or describe the leadership development model characteristics that were used along the way. So as a case overview, this case is located in East Otay Mesa. It's located between two prisons in a valley down between and behind two prisons. It started out as a private property owner who allowed a single person to move a trailer on their property. And over time, that was a little over 20 years ago. Over time, it evolved to where there were 35 different sites. Many of the sites had multiple trailers on a single site. So a lot of families, children, animals, a whole host of things that happened there. Well, as I mentioned, it's a remote site, and this slide kind of shows what the site looks like and where it's located. Code compliance is complaint-driven, so no one responded. No one complained. So over years and years, it just grew and grew and grew. And then in 2013, we received a complaint and went out to investigate. So at that point, when our people went out to investigate, they've got a couple choices, right? We've got a whole host of code compliance tools that our staff can use. And some of them are really extreme. I mean, we could talk to Reagan and go to court and get a temporary restraining order or an injunction, a judicial order for the property owner to cease the illegal activity. But what we did really, our staff used organizational acumen and problem solving and worked and took the more kind and gentler approach, remained flexible, and helped the property owner to navigate to compliance. We did issue a administrative warning to give him notice, but we also brought him in for a series of meetings and helped for him to navigate to compliance and look at a way where he might be able to permit this RV park. But along the way, there were a lot of decisions to be made, a lot of choices, and one of the things we were doing was always trying to look ahead. What's going to happen next? And then assess the risks. There were a lot of risks with each choice we made. So we weighed the pros and cons of each risk as we move forward. So here's the leadership development model, and this is kind of a pause to where we can talk a little bit or look at the different characteristics. One of the things that I pointed out already was the idea of results orientation. The code enforcement officer wanted to get results and work to get results. And then also organizational acumen. How, customer service is a core competency in the leadership development model and really a behavior that we all are supposed to exhibit. So we work with that customer to try and provide good service and help him to compliance.
So Clay, I have a question for you. When you said that you first knew this in 2013 is when the first complaint came, you are a code enforcement officer, right? And so not you personally, but you as a department. So you could go out there and cite them and you could have just gave them the penalty and the fines, but you said that you gave them a warning and then you invited them in. Why did you do that?
Ultimately, that's, it would be bad customer service not to talk to someone first, but also code compliance, the way you obtain compliance is through really motivating. You get a lot more, what's the saying, You know, what is it? You attract more birds with honey than with whatever. I forgot it. But basically, sorry about that. Totally forgot to say. That's not part of the script. But anyway, the bottom line is we try and motivate people. The way that we're successful typically in these cases is to continue to keep the pressure on and keep the conversation up and keep them moving. And so that's what we did.
So to the audience, I'm going to help you. This will be the easy one. We'll give you the hard ones in the next panel. Look on interpersonal relationships and tell me what behaviors they demonstrated by inviting them in. Yes, in the back.
Seeks to understand perspectives and needs of others.
Exactly. Because they could have just left it. But in bringing them in, it wasn't just a conversation, a one-way conversation where they said, this is what you've done wrong, this is what we expect of you. They invited them in to have a conversation. I have 3 checked. What's the other one? What's another one? Yes.
Builds trusting relationships.
Exactly. Right. How many more birds can you get with honey? When you build relationships, right? And so that is the whole point of it. You're actually, this is such a simple step too, because your job becomes easier when you can build those relationships, when you can have those conversations, than when it's just tension and it's conflict. It makes it much more difficult. So even though they're facing potentially a very difficult situation, the first thing that they do is go out and build a relationship. Anyone have one more? Interpersonal relationships. Yes. Yes. Huge. Treats others with dignity and respect, because you'll get a lot further when you can do that step first. What does that mean? It means taking the ego out of it. You have every right to go and give a citation, but it's up to you to decide to build that relationship and treating others with dignity and respect. Thank you for that. All right, Clay, what happened next?
So next, we gave the property owner time and had a couple meetings. Time slipped away and we found that there wasn't a lot of progress being made. I asked the code enforcement officer to go out. Actually, no, they did this on their own. They took initiative and did this on their own. They went back out and took a look at this. And this is what you can see the pictures on the slide here. This is what the site looked like. It had now been about 2 years. They had tried to get their permits. There were barriers to getting the permits. One of the primary ones was access, but they didn't have legal access to their parcels. But, more importantly, it was now 2 years, the site had grown, there were hazards. It was, okay, what do we do now? And looking at this, knowing this was going to be a big task to take on, really, really big task. But we knew that we needed to do it. So at this point, I'm going to, kind of turn it over to Reagan, and she's going to talk a little bit about what our next steps were.
So we thought we chose wisely on our first decision point. However, we didn't get a lot of movement, and at that point we had to do another assessment, which is actually kind of the resource-intensive part of our whole adventure here, was that every step of the way we had to continually reassess and look into the future and try to see what was going to be the result, what's the big picture, what's this going to look like to everybody. So at our second decision point, after no movement, what do? How many people in this room have ever had an issue come across their desk or an email or something, and you look at it and you think, I think my neighbor over in this department might be able to handle this better? Anyone? Right? All of you should raise your hands, right? I mean, that's just something, you could punt it, right? We could have found a different home for this issue, because as you'll learn as we go along, it touched so many different departments. So we could have tried to find a different home for it. And I think that's just a general way that you assess a problem, right? Where does it best fit? So that's one of the things we could have done. But also we thought, what will happen if and we could also have done nothing. Code compliance is not required to do enforcement. They could just have said, nobody's really complaining. We only had one complainant from the beginning. We don't need to do anything with this. We can just keep letting it linger. And while that's legally fine to do, it's not really the right thing to do. But those are some of our options. And we also thought, what happens if we do that? What if we ignore it? we thought for sure this is eventually going to end up in the media. This is a big issue, and God forbid something happened and there's a health hazard, and you'll hear more from Keith about what that site looked like. And somehow nobody got sick, and somehow we didn't have some crazy crisis on our hands. But if we left it lingering, it could have turned into that. So what we did instead is we decided to engage. We decided not to kick the can down the road, and we decided to really engage, pick it up, and just start running with it and working with our partners from all the agencies.
So when you were doing this, you were talking about punting it off. That's an option, right? It's an option.
Yeah.
And you could have, and what would have been the ramifications for punting it off?
Oh, well, we think that the problem could have gotten bigger. Also, I think that we would have looked like, from the outside, like the county's not doing anything. Even though we're not required to do something, I think it would look like that we're shirking our duty. We aren't doing what the community is expecting us to do.
So audience, what two competencies are they talking about right there? Just the competency, not the behavior. Initiative and, okay, give me three. Yeah, problem solving, and then what's the third one? All right, you're right, they're all of them, but organizational acumen is another one, because what I'm hearing her say is, yeah, we could have, but it's not about that. It's the bigger picture. What are we going to look like when we just let it go, and how is it going to affect us later? And so there's two areas, and I want you to dig deeper, and under initiative, which is a huge one, because they took an initiative to go ahead and take this on. Give me some behaviors that they had demonstrated in doing that. Absolutely. Motivates to perform beyond. And what else?
Gives extra effort when not required to do so.
Yes. Gives extra effort when not required to do so. Another huge one. What else?
Looks beyond department boundaries when making decisions.
Yes. Looks beyond the department boundaries, because she was saying, first she said, well, I could just call my friend in another department and hand it off to them. And so she did immediately look outside the department, but it wasn't necessarily for partnering in the beginning. It was, how do I get out of this? But then it's a moment thought, because that's not who they are. In leadership, we don't do that. And so she went immediately to the next part. Yes.
I'm having a difficulty here with some of the options. And can you explain to me how the option to do nothing, when you've gone onto the site, you see all of these illegal situations of housing and pollution and, people living in these circumstances? How is that option to ignore? How is it?
That description is actually the perfect reason why we didn't, but we're actually not required to do any citations. It's just not, it's not required, it's an option. They could do administrative remedies, we could do a warning, but they're always trying to move toward compliance. But again, because they're complaint-driven and the law doesn't require them to move forward, it's technically an option. And the way you phrased it was perfect, because we did not see an option. We thought, there's no way we're just going to let this linger.
Yeah, so I have an issue with that, the options of doing nothing and ignoring or moving forward. And I just never would have considered that ignoring.
And that says a lot about you. It does. And because let me bring it down to another issue. So we're not here, but how many of you leaders have employees? Anybody have employees? No? Okay, yeah.
Employees.
So employees, yeah. So with an employee, is it written somewhere that you're required to talk to them every day? Is it written that you're required to talk to them when they're having a bad day? Is it required? Are you required to do that? No. I mean, these are things as leadership that you look at the bigger picture. And so you do these things. Not everything in leadership is black and white. And so when you have an option like this, she's saying that they do not have to issue citations, period. So they don't have to. It's an option as written. I don't think it was a never option in their mind. It was just something that they're sharing with you as, here's a fork that we came in the road and we decided to go this way because that's the only thing. She said the words, I wrote it down, it's the right thing to do. And they went the right way. So thank you for that. Megan?
Reagan.
Oh, Reagan, sorry.
No, that's okay. I think I'm going to turn over to Keith now for a lovely walkthrough of the property.
All right, so once a decision was made to be proactive and to go out and do something, we kind of had two choices at that point. Either PDS could go it alone, because PDS goes it alone a lot, like Reagan said. This started ultimately with the zoning issue. You remove all the people that aren't zoned to be there and the problem's solved. But instead, we chose a different path. How many here are familiar with the Deluge compliance team? Either been involved or heard of it? Raise your hands high. That's about a third of the room. That's actually quite a bit, more than I expected. For those of you that aren't familiar with the Deluge compliance team, it was developed about 18 months ago, and it's comprised of managers from departments that have compliance-related issues on a regular basis. Think of DEH, DPW, PDS, Ag Weights and Measures. So those groups are routinely working on compliance-related issues. So this group gets all of those managers together, and we talk about and identify these types of complex, potentially multi-jurisdictional issues that confront us on a regular basis. We really focus on the issues that are out there affecting a lot of different groups and a lot of different departments, even outside the county. And ultimately, we start by doing a comprehensive evaluation of a particular site. So what are all the issues at the site? We get that information, we come up with a plan, we prioritize, and when we're doing this, we're looking at the bigger problem. We're not looking at just, what are the code issues or what are DEH issues. We're looking at issues outside the county too. We want to really tackle and solve the entire problem. Ultimately, we develop and implement a plan that addresses that. So in a nutshell, that's really what the Deluge compliance team does. So for those of you that, especially those that are familiar with it, what competencies do you think the Deluge compliance team embodies from this list?
Problem solving.
Yes, results orientation. This one's really easy. As it turns out, the Deluge compliance team really embodies every single one of these. Every single one of these competencies the Deluge compliance team utilizes on a regular basis. They're required really for us to be successful.
Keith, let me ask them that. Why? Why is it that team, the Deluge compliance team, covers all competencies? Share with me some behaviors or just an explanation as to why. What are they? So instead of taking this on their own, they took the initiative to go out and work with other departments. And so they brought other departments in that might have some purpose to be in there. So they're looking globally at this. They're getting multiple agendas, hints, and purposes. And what they're doing with this, they're intended to use this team to get further result. Does a person think better on their own or in a group? In a group, always. And so there's that synergy. You get all of the minds together, you're going to have a better result. So it affects results orientation. Interpersonal relationships. Now they're building relationships not only with the individuals at the site, but they're also building relationships with these other departments that they're now combined with and working together in a compliance team. I share this with them when they share me the story. I've been with the county for a long time, and I rarely have ever heard of this occurring, and it's brilliant. It's brilliant because you do get all the minds together and you work with the resources that already have it. When you don't do that, you're just trying to find these on your own. It's like, well, I'm searching for things, I'm recreating the wheel all the time, and they didn't. They put all the parts together. Problem solving, easy. They have all the different parts now. And so if they don't have the exact information, they could go to another department and get that for problem solving. It literally covers every single one. Developing others, you think it affects developing others? How much did you guys learn from this project?
I was just going to say, I was new to the county, and the compliance team had started almost at the same time that I got there. So I learned so much about all the different departments, and I think even people who had been here a while still learned other services that could come from different departments and different divisions within those departments. It was really eye-opening for me. I learned so much.
I agree. I'm not new to the county, and I'm still, every time I meet, each meeting, I might meet a different person from another department that might be a resource in the future. And I would also add about development of others. It gives an opportunity for enforcement line staff to be in a meeting with directors, deputy directors from multiple departments, to have multiple county councils there and hear a wide variety of perspectives. And it's really a great learning tool as well. So,
Thank you. Regan. Go ahead.
It's Keith's turn still.
So the first step, of course, was to conduct a comprehensive assessment and figure out exactly what we're dealing with, because we had been out there, but we haven't been out there with everybody. So we started out, PDS, DEH, DPW, we went out to this site, and yeah, there were a lot of issues going on. A lot of issues. So it started with illegal grading. Of course, there was tons of trash and debris that they dumped. They graded that right in. So we had an illegal landfill, a whole nother set of regulations and another group involved. They didn't have any utilities out there, no electricity. They were relying on solar panels, generators. They had no sewage disposal, other than the pits of sewage around the property, the sewage that they were throwing over the fence that was hanging out of the trees. They didn't really have any water. They had a water line that snaked through there, and when somebody needed water, they just tapped into that sucker. And from the environmental health perspective, that is scary. Somebody drops a hose in one of those, sewage pits, and all of a sudden everybody's, getting extra flavor. But, and it goes beyond that. There were animals everywhere. They had a bull roaming around the property. Horses, chickens, dogs, you name it. And like Reagan said, there were children out there. So, once we saw all of this stuff, we're like, okay, some of these things we got to jump on right now. And we did. Ultimately, we involved CPS so that they could come in, not because we were, trying to get anybody in trouble. We were really trying to provide some services to these people, make sure that the kids had what they needed. We also had animal services come in. We got storage tanks for their sewage. And we handled the immediate threats. And once we did that, we determined, look, ultimately these people don't necessarily need to leave right now. We decided we could let them stay on the property while we dealt with this larger issue.
And the reason I think, too, that we did that, I think a lot of people, especially a lot of complainants, forget the very human part of this. The people that were living there could not have just gone out and gotten a new place to live. They couldn't just find another apartment real quick. Like, that's not what we were dealing with. So we had to be very sensitive to their needs and also what that would look like. We didn't want to just force them all out after we were able to kind of secure the health and the immediate risks. We wanted to give them the opportunity to find, to relocate themselves and assist them as much as we could in that process.
Right, and ultimately this approach, it really showed, strong organizational acumen. So I give you one for free. But now it's your turn to tell us, what other competencies were we utilizing at this time? What are you seeing? Oh, yeah.
When they said that they had they said that they wanted to provide services. When I first heard this, I was listening to this whole story unfold, and it just is amazing to me, all of the things and the points that they hit. First, it was a citation or not a citation. Now it's building this compliance team, and now it's caring. It's going out and saying, you know what, it's more than this. Reagan said they're people. It's like they're humans. We want to make sure that we provide services to them. We want to make sure that they're staying healthy. And not only that, after we get them healthy, we don't say, congratulations, now we're going to kick you out. These are all elements. I'll tell you what, you can't find that in leadership direction. These are parts of a true leader, that they think of a situation and what you said. It naturally comes out as what's the right thing to do. How do we handle this? But you'd be surprised that there are some that don't do that. They're like, this is what we got to do. We do it. They're gone. And so they've gone many steps further in how they handle this. Yes.
I was just to say, there were a lot of concepts in a personal relationship. it speaks to this, in particular, seeking to understand perspective of others, and also treating others with dignity and respect. I think is a huge part of that. So,
Yeah, and you'll see more of that as we move forward. But go ahead to the next slide, Clay. But that really brings us to the third decision point. So we have our comprehensive assessment done. We have an idea of what we're dealing with. It's like scary as heck. And we could choose to get out the club, cite people, hit them with civil penalties. These are, of course, people that can't really afford to pay the rent at a normal place. We could hit them with big fines. We could get the sheriff out there, start doing some misdemeanor cites. But instead, we chose a different path. What are some of the things that might have happened if we, brought out the big club and just started writing fines?
Whack-a-mole.
Exactly. I mean, these people didn't have the resources to move, so if we're going to hit them with a fine, what's that going to do? I mean, they're probably not going to move because they can't, or they already would have. So alternatively, we took a different approach. Our approach was much more compassionate. It was much more focused on the people. And we kept our club in our back pocket, and we did that by issuing a notice and a compliance order to the owner of the property. But at the same time that we did that, we decided, hey, look, these people need some help. The county's got resources. We don't know what all those resources are, but let's go find them. And ultimately, that's what we did. We started amassing the county's resources to help these people. And ultimately, what we did is we planned and we implemented a resources event. Now, this was not an easy task, I can assure you. It started with me making a couple phone calls to some people I'd worked with in HSA or HHSA in the past. They made some phone calls, and they made some phone calls. And pretty soon, we cast a pretty wide net over HHSA and identified a bunch of the resources. The process in doing that really helped build some relationships. I mean, these are people that I'll be able to work with in the future. I've got their names, they know me, they've been through the process. And ultimately, we brought all these people together for this resources event. There were 21 different staff from 9 different county programs that came out there on a Saturday. They sacrificed their Saturday. And, we went out, we got chairs and tables and canopies, and those all came from, you name it. The Registrar of Voters gave us the canopies and the chairs. The Family Resource Center brought us the tables. We had people bringing fruit and water. And ultimately, this thing came together on a Saturday. And we advertised this through one of the relationships that we had made with the property manager. He turned out to be a great asset to us because he knew everybody, he knew when they were there, and he went and visited everybody, let them know what was going on, gave them our brochure. And ultimately, we touched every single person out there. There were a couple people that couldn't come to the event because they were too sick, and we went and visited them. We brought them the resources and got them involved. And, this isn't something that environmental health typically does. It's definitely not something that codes does or DPW. This is way outside our wheel shop. But it was important. And one of the most important parts about this was the interpersonal relationships. That's your gimme. So let's see what other competencies we utilized.
Real quick.
When you guys were in the process of this and you saw that it was growing and growing, what were you guys thinking during the time? And at any time did you think, wow, this is just too big to handle, or how did I get into this, or retirement's a good time now? What were you tking?
There were a lot of retirements at that time.
We did lose a couple of people, actually, in the process, which made all of our workload increase, right?
Yeah, no, we lost the codes chief, we lost environmental, land and water quality division, environmental health chief.
So that's not really where I wanted to go, but
I think some of us.
Can we just rewind that?
Yes.
So going into,
So I'll interject.
this
This was a
project.
very different answer yesterday in rehearsal. I did not give up. I mean, it was a big problem, but we took the attitude, you eat an elephant one bite at a time. I got this one right. And we just kept going. And it was, if we had looked at the entire problem as just the whole thing, maybe it would have been overwhelming, but, just perseverance. And I know that's one of the behaviors in the leadership development model. And that's what got us through. I'm going to kind of interject a little because I think that on the personal side, I had a personal experience that I want to share, and with this photo. So we talked a lot about the idea of treating others with dignity and the idea of these are these people's homes, that they were the victim, not the violators. And someone from the agency brought about 30, maybe 35 backpacks and gave every one of them away. And you would not believe the joy on these kids' faces when they received a free backpack or a new backpack. It was really moving and kind of shows how fortunate we are and how much they need our help. So I just wanted to interject that because that's there on the photo.
and yes,
This is like a question. You guys look outside the town or things that work, that didn't work, for example, like the same type of thing for Sutton County.
I'm sorry, the question was, did we look outside the county for what?
For assistance. In other words, if you're Sutton County went through the same scenario you're going through like that, so you look at outside the county and other jurisdictions that what worked, what didn't.
And we did. We looked at, for example, 211, right, which helped with placement. They weren't at the event with us, but they provided, contact information so that we could pass that information out to the people. So they could ultimately, utilize the resources that they had to offer. But part of casting our net was definitely outside the county. There's no doubt about that. What surprised me was how many resources we actually had within the county.
I think one of the things that if you look down on results orientation, and you could, almost all of them, I mean, they're persisting over time and in the face of obstacles, they're tenacious, resilient, recovers fast, demonstrates a desire to improve themselves, and sets and achieves challenging goals for themselves, follows through on commitment, remains optimistic and persistent. All of these things is what was demonstrated. But, I want to get into something else about this, is that there's feelings involved. And when you guys have a really hard workload, are you cheery normally? I'm just curious. I am, but I mean, a lot of people, when you get a hard workload, you get into a more serious mode. Now you're on just task mode. And they had this enormous task, and they're building relationships. And I love it. Clay shared that with me about the backpacks. I mean, it just makes your heart melt to think that they went out and they got all these backpacks, and they just affected these people. So this goes way, way beyond the scope of a job. And it really talks about developing you as a leader. Who are you as a whole? And just I've been with this group, 3 or 4 times, and listening to their stories, it just makes me see each one of them very differently as a person, as a whole, because the job at one point stopped, and then they took over. A leader took over. And that's what all the demonstration is that they're talking about here. So thank you.
And I know we kind of laughed about having some retirements. They had nothing to do, obviously, with this project, but what it did change the dynamic of our group, right? We lost some of our really good resources of our organizational acumen and all their long-term information, and then our workload increased because they were gone. So I know it did become overwhelming for several of the people on the team. It really did. It was overwhelming, but they kept going.
Let me ask you something. It's overwhelming, but you guys were still persistent, and you still went on. What did you pull out of yourself to do that?
I think everybody supported each other. Like, I think that we really relied heavily on Ken as the code compliance officer. We relied on Keith to step into the shoes of the person who left. And I think we all just kind of supported each other. We knew that his workload then doubled. Mm-hmm. And so we said, well, what can we do to help? Can we take X, Y, or Z away from you? Can one of us kind of look into this issue?
Yeah, and it was actually really nice. If I needed something, I just cast out an email, and wham, I knew somebody would hit me back with something. And that's one of the things, back to Ann, that's one of the things that really helps keep you going. I mean, if you're there on an island, you know, you're like, oh, I'm going to die. But that's not where we were.
Yes.
One thing that is not being mentioned is the consensus building that you guys did. Because you guys didn't try to solve the problem from the outside. You got the people involved. And that made a big difference. Because now it's a collaboration. And they're trying to solve the problem for everybody.
Right, we were looking at it from a global perspective, that's exactly right. We were solving problems that weren't really our problems, but they were still problems.
Thank you for that. I appreciate you bringing that up because there's lots of behaviors on here. And if any of you are thinking of an example that you're thinking of, wow, they really did this, please share it with us because this is just sharing all of the different ways that you can demonstrate this and build this. Thank you.
Right, and you know, it was more than this group up here because when we did the event, the people were really tentative. I mean, they like came out of the gates, but they were kind of like checking us out, you know, oh, what's all this stuff? And ultimately, the people that were out there, the 21 people, I mean, instantly, the second people started showing up, they just started intermingling with them and talking with them, asking them, hey, what's your situation? What do you need? And little by little, they worked those people right over to the canopies, sat them down in a chair, and ultimately, you know, we ended up trusting each other and we were able to provide them with resources. But it was more than just us. It was the boots on the ground that did that too. And I think that's important here. Yeah. And with that, I'm going to give it over to Ken. And Ken is going to talk a little bit about what happened next.
Yeah, so to wrap up, going back to March when we issued a compliance schedule, we gave several dates for the property owner to complete different tasks. Some of them were pretty easily attainable, things like removing abandoned vehicles, but the most prominent one was having all the tenants vacated. And so we issued this in March and we gave a September 30th due date to vacate all the tenants. And you know, it was a reasonable due date. It wasn't overly strict, but even then, we realized there was a good chance that it was not going to be met. So anticipation was really key, and not only that, but we wanted to look into all the different ways it could play out. Maybe little to no progress, maybe there's a decent amount of progress, maybe they do real well and they get most of the people out. And that kind of, I think, became our realistic goal, is maybe not having everyone out, but having most people out by that deadline. And so the next thing we wanted to do is really set to doing everything we could to make sure that happened. So we had to take initiative, and one of the first things we did, we started making more regular site visits to the property. By the time we got to September, we were out there every week, and we still go out there every week. And, you know, we really wanted to put the pressure on the property owner, let them know that this isn't something that's going away. You know, initially in 2013, when all this started, they got a warning, you know, and we had some meetings, but when we didn't follow up, things kind of continued on as normal. So for us, we wanted to, you know, make sure we weren't out of sight, out of mind. We wanted to be there, put the pressure on. And I think also for the tenants, it had the effect of, you know, for them, it was like, okay, this is for real. You know, the county's really involved, and they're not going to go away. And unfortunately, we are going to have to move out. But it also gave us the opportunity to be there, to interact with the tenants, and to be able to talk with them, answer questions they had about the process, direct them to different kind of resources, and kind of in the same vein as the resource event that we had. So that was real positive about it. But going back to our, you know, actions with the property owner, one of the other things we did, we required them to give us weekly updates, kind of force them to, you know, every week have some kind of progress to give to us. Maybe they're not getting attended out, but, you know, they'll do something to show that they're doing something, you know, maybe getting rid of an unoccupied trailer or getting rid of a significant amount of junk. So that kind of kept progress moving forward. And then we had several meetings with the property owner. This kind of required them to develop plans that made sense, communicate those plans with us, commit to them, and then, you know, held them responsible for following up with them. And one of the most important ones, I think, was in the month of September, that last month that they had before they had the due date to vacate the tenants. We sat down with them and they talked about, you know, the options that they had and how, you know, they have the option at that point to evict these people. They were on month-to-month leases. They had been terminated with proper notice, but to do that, it would be contentious. It would leave it up to the court versus the alternative that they preferred, which was working with the tenants, maybe offering deals in the form of cash, helping them transport trailers, helping them transport vehicles, or helping them find places where they can go if they had special circumstances. Maybe they had pets, maybe they had oversized trailers, helping them find a place that would take them. And so we really supported this avenue. Our top priority was the well-being of the people. So when September 30th came and the deadline was not met, not everyone was out, but we were happy with the way it was being done, and we did have most people out. So at that point, with our realistic goal of having, most people out showing good progress, we felt like we were pretty successful with that at that point.
Ken, when you were doing all of this, so this is a lot of what you're sharing is that you got to the point where you did put a little push on them. You gave a little pressure to the tenants and you gave a little pressure to the property owner, but still in a way that you preserved all that you did up to then. And so when this story is very complex because they have options all the time, and you might think, and I hope you think, that there's not really an option because there's not. But you do have options, and they at that point could have said, well, we'll give you till September 30th, you're out. If you're not out, we're done. We've been giving you all of these things, and believe it, there are people that may take that option, but you didn't. And you really wanted to maintain the relationships. You really want to maintain the key, who you are, the organization. Do you think the County of San Diego, even Luge, but the County of San Diego is represented out there? Huge. And everybody's watching to see how this is all playing out. So when you look at two of the competencies, initiative and results orientation, what do you find in there? It's all marked up right there. Thanks, Clay.
Sorry. Gave away the introducer.
There it is. Okay. But this is just an example of how many behaviors that they demonstrated. And hopefully what you're getting out of this story is just how full this is and that this is real. This model is real. The behaviors are real. It happens. They didn't go through, I doubt, that they went through their first meeting and said, let's look at that model and see what we can actually demonstrate in behavior. They didn't do that. They did their job as leaders, and by doing their jobs as leaders, they hit all of these very naturally. Any others that you see on here that you want to add? Yes.
Well, one thing that I wanted to point out is that all of these things that are on the leadership development model and that are really sort of typified by what happened is really tied into the larger county trauma-informed approach. And so, you think about how scary it is if somebody came to your house and said, everything you're doing here is wrong, right? And, or somebody came in and said, you need to move soon, like right away, and you can't take your dog or whatever. And so there's a lot of, and I'm going to go out on a limb here and say there were probably some varying levels of mental health ability and capacity out there, as well as physical health. And so it's hard to, it's not as simple as, I think, going out and just saying, hey, we're the county, you can trust us. It's really about being able to build rapport in a thoughtful way and a trauma-informed way, which is really about the dignity, respect, and building that rapport. So I think you'd be remiss not to tie that back into that larger trauma-informed approach, which is really exactly what happens here.
Let me just share something. You say we would be remiss. Somebody says it's not an option. And I really, really want to make a point at, that's what this group is all about. That's what this group has been taught. This is what your leaders demonstrate. And so when you say that it's not an option, because it's not an option, it's never been an option. But in the real world, sometimes it is. And that's the ones that maybe you see on television and the ones that get caught up in some of these other things. But I love to hear when you debate back, take a debate, I love it. And so when you debate back and say, hey, that's not an option, because it's not. It really is not. But that is demonstrative of who you are as leaders already, that you already go there naturally. It's like, no, that's the right thing to do. That's what we're going to do.
Sorry, I didn't say we're
No. I love it. No, please. You're good.
Trying to get back to trauma informed, because this is really I feel like this is a great thing coming from HHSA. Hey, like, this would be an excellent example to HHSA because they're really throwing in everybody. HHSA is trauma-informed. This is a great thing outside of that.
Yes.
I really like the positive comments about, even though that the deadline wasn't met exactly on the 30th, that what progress was made and that was recognized. I think sometimes we get in our mind, okay, this is the deadline, it's got to be met, and we look at that, oh, we didn't meet it, oh, that doesn't sound like that happened at all. And I think that's really encouraging. I'm sure it was for the property owner as well to hear, okay, wow, you made a lot of progress.
I think that you totally hit it right on. And we thought about that as we were going through. Because of the relationship that Ken made and the rest of Code Compliance made with that property owner, he really actually became engaged and he helped make the compliance schedule. So because he was so involved in it, when we were approaching the point where we knew it wasn't going to be met, they all just had a conversation about it and it wasn't a big deal. And it could have been a big deal. But because of the way they treated it, it really was able to be worked out. And that was really helpful because it could have turned really bad. Or not bad, just a different, we would have gone more, traditional enforcement and that, would have a different host of issues.
Yeah, one of the things that we didn't talk about a lot is we actually were able to bring him in to our process. I mean, he was the one that was like, okay, maybe I can help these people out, which was really odd. I mean, we were enforcing against this guy, but we were able to bring him into the fold. And he was actually doing this stuff too, and he's never seen it before. And I think that's one of the successes here, and especially with Codes working with him, is bringing him into the fold so that he could take our approach and take the same steps from his perspective and his point of view, so that we can get a positive outcome, which we ultimately did.
So how did this end?
Yeah, so from that point, we kept rolling forward. Kept some pretty steady progress the whole time. There was a point where for about a month things got kind of stagnant, but we pulled the property owner in again, kind of just to spur things forward. And where we sit today is we've finally had all tenants vacated from the property. This picture here, property owner sent it to us a few weeks ago. Got a drone up there, took a pretty good picture. You see a few mobile homes and a trailer. Those are all on one lot. They belong to one person. They're cleared out, and they're going to be removed pretty soon here. So at this point, with everybody out, we're kind of at the simple phase of just everything else has to go, and it's just cleaning up what junk and waste is left. So we're pretty happy with where we are now, and we're looking forward to wrapping this up pretty soon.
Excellent. So, questions? Any questions from the audience for the panel?
How did you get the owner to opt like this? Because he was basically moving his income.
I think this is really a testament to Code's success in working with them on a regular basis. I mean, they were meeting with him, they brought him into the process. It wasn't like, you're going to do this. It's like, hey, we got to solve this problem. Do you have any ideas? And he's the one that came forward and said, hey, maybe I can get some tow trucks for these guys whose vehicles aren't running, and we can tow them to a real RV park. So I think Codes is, they really are the ones that made that success happen.
Yes.
In instances like this, it sounds like a great program over many years to treat all the people, humanely and whatnot, and all these wonderful techniques. Sometimes, however, you get to the end where maybe you do have one or two people who simply are not going to accept the help or whatnot, and you get to a point where you have to move from more of a collaborative effort into some sort of enforcement. Did you guys have any of that at the end with any of the tenants or the property owners?
You're right. There are times when we might have to use a stronger enforcement tool, and many times along the way, there were times where we threatened. I mean, our letters would say, here's your compliance schedule, but if you don't comply, here are the consequences. Fortunately, in this case, we didn't ever have to assess a fine or really do a really hard line enforcement on anybody. We just mostly just obtained success through constant pressure and constant interaction and relationship. We were lucky. The homeowner, or excuse me, the property owner could have really resisted us even more, but I think he saw that this was real. By being constantly in contact, people understand that it is real a little bit more. And so, but there are times when we do have to do administrative civil penalties or something more stringent.
Let me share something with you, and then we'll close this one, and we'll take a quick 5-minute break. When you're a leader, this is who you are. And so thank you for the question you posed to them, because I thought of that too. What if this landowner was a jerk and he was pushing back and he was fighting them? And I don't think that the resolution would have been that much different because of who they are. And so they would have still tried to work within what they do, what they feel is right, how to push through, be persistent, but maybe it might look a little different. But I don't really think that the outcome would have been that differently, because it's not necessarily about the situation you're in. It's about who you are as a leader and how you handle that and all situations. So with that, we're going to take a 5-minute break. We'll come back at 10:05 and for the second panel. Thank you. So we are going to introduce our next panel and the situation that the second panel went on, but as the purpose of this meeting is for you to really start attaching the issues and the sensitivities and the challenges that leaders go through with the model. So a lot of this is going to come back on you. So I hope you're ready. That was your warm-up. So as we go through and we still get to that slide, the blank slide, and whoever has the clicker, don't click past the blank slide. And so when we get to the blank slide, then I'm going to turn it over to you all, and we're going to have a conversation about all of the different behaviors that they are demonstrating. So we'll go ahead and turn it over to Megan.
Okay, well, good morning. I'm glad to see that there's so many people here today. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to come to the last session, but this is great. So my name is Megan Moore, and I'm the Assistant Director with the Department of Agriculture Weights and Measures. So I'm really excited this morning that we're able to come and speak to you about a really neat topic, marijuana. Very different from the first panel, so you'll be learning some very cool things from us. It's very exciting that we're able to come here and share some of our experiences with you in relationship to the leadership development model. So before we get started, what I'd like to do is just ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves. Start.
I'm Thomas Ledford with the Office of Strategy and Intergovernmental Affairs.
I'm Alex Bell. I'm with the Luge Executive Office.
Gloria Solano with the Department of Environmental Health. That's all right.
I know how to turn it on, so we'll just do this.
Gloria Solano with the Department of Environmental Health.
Joe Fracci with Planning and Development Services.
I'm Justin Crumley from the Office of County Counsel.
Thank you. Okay, great. So why don't we go ahead and get started. So as a manager, as a leader in any department in the County of San Diego, it's always our responsibility to be scanning the horizon for things coming that could possibly impact our county, our departments, our communities, and our stakeholders. So one way we do that is that we monitor legislation. And in 2015, there was new legislation introduced that has to do with medical marijuana. And potentially this new legislation could really impact how counties in the state of California regulate medical marijuana. So we recognize that, and in fact, many departments across the county recognize that, the magnitude of what this legislation could actually do. And most of us anticipated that the legislation would be passed. So, at the direction of Sarah, AWM took the lead on the formation of the County Medical Marijuana Working Group. So Sarah affords us a lot of autonomy, and she's really great about asking just the right questions to get us thinking just the right way. And taking her direction, we go and we develop where we need to be as a working group. So what is a working group? It's pretty simple. It's just a group of people, subject matter experts, that come together for a shared purpose. We take our knowledge and information and we share that with others, and we make recommendations based on our findings. I guess I'm supposed to be running this thing. Oops. Oh. Thank you. Oops. Okay, so who's involved? As you can see, it's many departments across the county. When we started this, we reached out to any department that we thought could possibly be impacted by the medical marijuana legislation. So the working group is multifaceted. We do a lot of different things, but basically we're focused on working together to get ahead of any changes in laws and regulations. It's our responsibility to recognize and identify impacts, both positive and negative, that could possibly happen to the county and our departments, and also to identify any risks and the mitigations that go along with those. So we do that. But we do it through study and the 3 C's. And I heard it mentioned in the previous panel, coordination, collaboration, communication. This is what the group does all the time. So as individuals, we work to go to different working sessions, workshops. We work with our other counties and jurisdictions. We also reach out and work with the state of California on trying to learn as much as we possibly can about marijuana. And of course, we read an awful lot. As you probably are aware, there's lots of accounts and articles that are in the news all the time. So we try to keep up on those things in addition to what's happening at the state level and at the local level. So what do we do with all that knowledge that we gain? Well, we come back to the working group and we share it. We collaborate, we share, we work as a team, and we help each other. So we've learned an amazing amount about marijuana, but what I would say is we've learned even more about each other and each other's departments, how we work, what we do, and how it all works together for the County of San Diego and for the community. We are the think tank for San Diego County when it comes to marijuana. And we are ready to address and are always preparing to address whatever could possibly come our way. And that changes all the time. And in fact, we have a lot of challenges that we've been faced with. And one of the first challenges that we had to face was, who's going to even be in the working group? We had to get the right people to the table to make sure that we were utilizing all of our knowledge to the best for the County of San Diego and the community. Because there are a ton of unknowns about marijuana. And I mentioned medical marijuana, but as you'll hear later, it's more than just medical now. So we have to take that into consideration also. And most of the departments involved in this have never had anything to do with marijuana. So this is a completely new landscape that we're just learning about. And it takes all of us to learn about it. What I would say is the biggest thing that I take away from my experience thus far in the working group is just how flexible and cooperative and incredible we can do things as a team, as working together. It's been really exciting, and it's going to continue to be exciting, I'm sure, into the near future regarding new elements of medical and adult use marijuana.
Megan, when you said that you didn't know anything about marijuana, so when you were, that's a serious question. Sorry. Did you inhale? No, just kidding. So here's my question. When you were faced with this and it's something that's completely blank, how did you feel? I mean, when you are posed with a challenge and you're not familiar with the subject matter, how did that make you feel when you initially got that, and how did the team take that and work with that?
I would say the word that comes to mind is excited. I mean, that's what we do here at the County of San Diego. We're always looking at new things. I mean, that's part of the excitement of what each and every one of us do here, right? We're faced by challenges, we dig into them, and we figure out the best way to go. And so I would say excited is the word that comes to mind.
In the audience, how many of you, when you get up against something that you don't know, do you consider that exciting? Let me see your hands. Yeah, and how many of you just think of it as a little bit of a scary challenge? Yeah, it's true. So let's go to the next slide, but not the next.
Oh, thank you.
There, stop there. All right. I have to control this. So, go ahead. This is what I want you to do. She just laid out a whole big part of this for you, and she's got deep into it because she has the team. They have the working team now. They have an issue that they don't know. They anticipated this. It came out a year before, so they were already talking and thinking about what we're going to do with this in case and anticipating that it happens. So let's see. Let's just yell out what behaviors and competencies you see already being demonstrated. Initiative. What part of initiative?
Anticipate prepares for opportunities is not obvious to others.
Yes, exactly. What else?
Looks beyond department boundaries when making decisions.
Yes, exactly. What else?
Seeks opportunities.
Well organized?
Seeks opportunities for continuous learning and development.
Perfect. Any others? Let's see how you did. What's that?
Network.
Networks. Perfect. What was that one?
Looks beyond department boundaries.
Yeah, so they're already looking all over. They got this and they said, no, we need to already have this working team in place. So we're going to spread our wings. We're going to work with other people so that we could get their knowledge involved with this. We don't know about this subject, so we need to start collaborating. In fact, she said those the three words. What were they? Exactly, right there. That hits 3 different competencies. Well, let's see how many they hit. Next slide, please. This is going well. This is everything. I mean, and probably more. I was going through and I was trying to pick out the more obvious ones, but all of these things they've already hit. The 2 main ones were initiative and organizational acumen. It's a political issue. It's huge. They're coming up. They have to take it on, and it's also they're taking initiative of how they're going to do it. And so these are all the different areas that they hit. So let's hear more of the story.
Okay, I'd like to pass it on to Thomas now, and he's going to give us an overview of marijuana policy in California.
Good morning. So I'm not going to go too deep into the rabbit hole on the history of marijuana, but it started back in 1996 in the state of California when we passed the Compassionate Use Act. That remained pretty much steady until 2003, when this was supplemented by the cleverly numbered State Senate Bill 420. These two together kind of formed the loose framework which led to a nonprofit dispensary system that persisted for over a decade in the state. It didn't really lay out any kind of real regulatory framework, though, and the state agencies didn't really enforce or become that involved. In 2015, this changed. The state legislature saw on the horizon the eventual passage, kind of the writing on the wall of recreational marijuana. That would be in November 2016. So in 2015, they brought a 3-bill package forward, which essentially laid out a framework. This is the Medical Cannabis Regulation Safety Act. No one really wants to hear the acronym for that.
Go ahead and say it.
MCRSA. In the long run, this kind of both helped and complicated the situation because this laid out a framework which Proposition 64 later in November of 2016 for recreational marijuana somewhat followed. It mirrors it in a lot of ways, but it doesn't follow it exactly. So come the next year, November 2016, we have the passage now of recreational marijuana. So we have a framework for medical, framework for recreational, and that kind of left our group where we are. So I will pass it on to Joe and Justin for the...
Wait, next slide, please. Okay, so what did he talk about? What areas did he cover? There's 2 primary areas, I'll give you that. I know you're processing, I'll wait. What are the 2 main competencies that he just hit again? Organizational acumen and initiative. An initiative because they knew about these. It's been coming for a while, and so they knew about it, and they didn't just sit there waiting to say, okay, well, I'll wait till something happens before I do something with it. They took initiative a long time before and made plans for anticipating. They didn't know what was going to happen with it, but they thought, okay, what are the options here, and how can we plan with that? So both of those were the two primary competencies. We could flip the slide. You'll be like that? I can flip? Okay. All right, we'll go to the next one.
Okay, so good morning, everybody. So the thing I wanted to talk about a little bit is how we tracked and monitored and reported out on what was happening with the marijuana issue. And as everybody in this room can imagine, extremely complex, dynamic, ever-evolving issue. By way of background, in addition to the Compassionate Use Act, the prior laws, and the new legislation, and then the adult use initiative that took place in November of last year, the county itself has medical marijuana regulations that we adopted back in 2010. So as part of that and all of that dynamic taking place, there was always a lot of interest that has been spurred on, first of all, by the public, and the public wanting to know how they can utilize our existing regulations, what the state was doing in terms of medical marijuana, what the state was doing in terms of adult use. You know, there's always that confusion between the county and the city, what does the county allow and what does the city allow? So we had to be real knowledgeable of, you know, not only what was happening here, but what was happening in other parts of the county and in other parts of the state. You know, we have 26 community planning groups. Some of them are affected by our existing regulations and where medical marijuana facilities could go. So obviously they have an interest of what is taking place and these new laws and the existing ordinance and how it affects them and how it affects their communities. And then because of everything that was taking place, we also had many media inquiries. So we had to coordinate internally within the group, with Luge, to make sure that we had a consistent message moving forward in terms of the county's position and how these the legislation initiatives affect us and how they affect our current ordinance. We also took we were also real cognizant moving forward about briefing internally. So the group itself, we would meet and, you know, brief ourselves and make sure that we were up to speed. But, you know, we also briefed our departments, the Luge, and we also took the opportunity to brief the county executive team at an event. And we also had the opportunity to brief the board offices. So again, they had a lot of interest because there's a lot of interest from the public. They were obviously getting pinged and heard a lot through, you know, their constituents asking them about our existing ordinance, what the legislation means to us, what the upcoming initiative was going to happen. So that being the case, you know, it was real important, the group itself, our group itself, our working group, that we were all on the same page in terms of our messaging and moving forward and being able to tell the same story consistently from whoever, you know, whether we received an inquiry from the public, from the community, from the board offices, or from, you know, our management team.
So when you were doing this, how many balls did you feel like you were juggling at the same time?
Many.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so just to get a crossover here, how many of you have done a project or something that you were on that you just felt like there are many balls that you're juggling at the same time that you can't really drop any of them, you have to keep your eye on them? And then to add to that, they're responsible for answering questions. And you're saying that they're asking you, and they almost have an expectation that you're going to have an answer for things that haven't actually been done yet. And so your mission was to be on the same page so that everybody is either saying, and I don't know, or whatever the answer might be. How many of you can relate with that? It's an issue. I mean, it's a challenge, and this is part of some of the things. It's complex because our problems as leaders aren't simple. They become complex. So looking at this, share some of the competencies that were displayed in that, or using your own scenario. What are some of the competencies and behaviors that are displayed in there?
Organizational acumen.
Organizational acumen. What if one of those balls dropped? What if somebody gave a different answer than someone else and they have the same information? Give me one more. Interpersonal relationships? Who said that? How? And share that with me. How?
In the constant communication, understanding each other's perspectives or how this potentially emerging issue could touch on the various departments, from a zoning perspective, from an edible food perspective, from cultivation and agriculture measures, with additional legislation that might be coming out, big cash crop, business laws, share it.
It's huge. And, it crosses over with individuals' communication styles, too, because a lot of us like to work independently. A lot of us like to just be individuals. We don't necessarily like to share. We're not into interpersonal relationships because we don't need them. We just like to be by ourselves. And in this situation, that's not possible. It's not possible at all. You have to communicate. You have to share your information so that you are on the same page, because the implications of not are huge. And so I want to share that with you so that as you start hearing their story, you relate it to your own situations and things that you're doing in your departments. Thank you.
Okay, so we gave you some background on everything what was going on in terms of the state legislation initiatives. Then to make things a little bit more challenging, early in 2016, as a result of some community interaction at the board hearing. So what was also happening at this time is, because of everything that was happening with marijuana, there was more movement in terms of marijuana facilities going in the county. And this issue did come up at the board, and as a result of that, we received some direction from the board to come back with some various options to further regulate medical marijuana in the county. So again, that was just another layer of complexity, another thing to essentially juggle and understand. So as a result of that, one of the big things that we needed to do was fully understand the issues and fully understand a strategy and develop a strategy and approach moving forward as we started bringing forward reports and board letters to the board. And one of the first things that we got from the board, so we went to the board a number of times. We went in March and April, and then most recently this past January. But one of the things that we needed to do besides the ordinance options is we got some direction from the board, or what the board did do is adopt a moratorium to prevent further medical marijuana facilities to come forward until we develop these options. And then we ran into some issues with the moratorium on some folks that were in the pipeline. So just to talk a little bit about those legal aspects and the challenges facing that, I'm going to hand it over to Justin to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, it was definitely challenging. As the lawyer of the group, my initial interaction with the group and with management at the county level was to take some what are pretty complex laws and to translate those into bullet points that are easily digestible. I'd be willing to say, if we asked for a raise of hands, who actually read Prop 64 in its entirety or McChristen in its entirety in this room, and it's probably going to be very limited. But that was my initial kind of to interpret and digest this, and then to answer questions from the group. On a daily basis, I pretty much to this day, over the last year or so, receive questions on interpreting the laws. Does the tax apply here? Can we apply our own tax? What does the city's tax apply to? Can we split cultivation and storefronts? How do we do that? So when we went to the board, as Joe was saying, we received direction from the board, and to complicate
complicate things even more, we received split direction from the board. So they directed us, on top of our current ordinance, to come back with 7 different options. And then we went to the Planning Commission because it's a zoning ordinance amendment, and they added an additional option. So when we went to the board, Joe and I had to craft 8 different ordinance options as a variety pack. And then when we went in January, the board composition changed, and because of that, they decided not to go with any of the 8 ordinances that we developed. And they directed us to come back, which we are coming back in March, with an ordinance that will ban all medical and non-medical marijuana facilities in the unincorporated county. So one of the things that we had to be flexible with was the direction of the board and the changing composition of the Board of Supervisors. So those are some of the challenges. What's that?
When you say that statement, you said about unincorporated county,
Yeah, so
I misunderstood.
our zoning ordinances in the county of San Diego generally apply to the unincorporated area of the county, and the city of San Diego has their own marijuana ordinances that would apply to where they can site facilities. So when we develop options based on board direction, it generally applies to our zoning authority over the unincorporated area of the county. So where medical marijuana facilities can be located and operate within the county, within different types of zones, and in our county, it's industrial zones.
So, Justin, how much work went into putting those 8 proposals together?
It was a large amount of work that we went through to make sure. One of the challenges that we had was with this variety pack was not each of the options stood on their own. So we needed to be able to craft it, and I've never crafted an ordinance in 10 years as a lawyer working for public agencies like this, but to where it was a variety pack where they could choose option 1 and option 3, option 1, 3, and 5, option 2 and 7, or just stick with the current ordinance as we have it. So in that respect, it was extremely challenging, and we kind of had to think outside of the box to really come up with how could we accommodate not knowing what they were going to choose in the end.
Mm-hmm. And did you say that you had a questionnaire, a question and answer document?
Yeah, we, the whole group here worked together. We had, what we like to do generally when we go for the board, especially with controversial items, is to come up with a question and answer period so that when you're up there and they ask you questions, you know the answer. And you rehearse these things over and over again. And for complicated items like this, we had, I think, around a 30-page question and answer developed that range from everything across the board, from initiatives to taxes to the current laws to when they would go into effect, when people could get licenses, and then also how our current ordinances work, what you're allowed to do under those current ordinances. And that way, when you're at the Board of Supervisors and they say, well, when do the taxes kick in for the recreational licenses and when will those be answered? We know exactly who on that panel at the Board of Supervisors on the dais is going to answer that question, and we know exactly how they're going to answer it.
So how many of you worked on a project with a team that you just put everything into it, everything, and you knew you were ready, you had the answer? How many of you have had that incident? And then for them, they go to the board, and the board says, thank you, I see the 8, I don't want any of them. Right? And so what, as a leader, as a group, as a working group, what impact could that have on the group if they weren't displaying some of these competencies? And so I love this story too, because it tells a lot about the resilience and what they did in this. And so if we go to the next slide, I want you to talk about there are huge chunks to this story, and it's a little chunked out, but I want you to relate it again to some of the projects that you've worked in and the walls that you've hit and the setbacks you've had, and share not only what behaviors and competencies, but attach it to why. What did you hear here to attach that behavior? Yes.
I like the resiliency and recovering quickly from setbacks. I work with Joe all the time, so I know that he got out of the board hearing and went to work to recover quickly and kept all of our spirits up while he was busy on the marijuana.
Wow, and kept your spirits up. Excellent. That's even better. Good job. Yeah, good job. What else did you hear? What other competencies and behaviors?
Remains optimistic and persistent even under adversity.
Yes, did you say that because he said that he kept them up? Optimistic? Yes, and you have to. I mean, it's funny because I've seen people go through this and they hit a wall and they crash. And what happens with them is like their whole morale goes down and their mood goes down. And all that does in the end is stop them from doing their best, and it stops them from moving forward. And so they go through this. And so this is a really good lesson of just getting back up. I mean, he might have had a couple grumblings. I don't know. He has never shared that with anybody. But he still gets back up and he keeps going and moving forward, because as we've been talking about before, there is no other option. That's what we have to keep doing. They can't be like, oh, well, wow, that was tough. I give up. I'm not going to try anymore. It's not an option. So they have to keep moving forward. Let's show the next slide. I want to just demonstrate this. How many? These are all of the different behaviors that they've displayed in this. And you could see it hits problem solving, huge, getting into all the different areas of what they're doing with working together, staying on board with it, and also results orientation. They're following through with their commitments. They're persisting. They're not letting this drop. And this is what this model is all about in the complexity of a situation like this, where you start putting these pieces together. Again, I want to emphasize they didn't look at this and say, what do we want to demonstrate? They're doing their job, and in their job, they're demonstrating all of these different behaviors. Thank you for that. All right, who's next?
Good morning, everybody. Megan mentioned how diverse our group is. So what I want to do now is to share some of the different perspectives that we were discussing as we got into this issue in our group.
But up just a little higher. There you go.
This diversity is actually something that has been essential for a work group. Being able to look at all the different perspectives, also not only being able to anticipate how this is going to impact our individual programs, but also what risk cumulatively we can anticipate that this presents to the county. For instance, I'll talk about, in DEH. DEH, we are very interested in marijuana edibles. We, from the beginning, when this whole process started with new law went into effect, we knew that we might need to be regulating this, but we didn't know at the time. So we wanted to find out, and we proactively reached out to the state. We wanted to find out whether were they going to be regulating these as food, or we thought they were pharmaceuticals. And they said, well, actually, they're not pharmaceuticals, they're not edibles, and we're going to be just crafting regulations specifically for medical marijuana or for marijuana edibles, now both types of edibles. And the state, the California Department of Public Health, they're charged with having regulations ready so they can be implemented on January 1st of 2018, and that's just 10 months from now. So we wanted to be part of this process. So we have been reaching out to CDPH, the California Department of Public Health, because we want to be part of that process, because we're going to be regulating them. We know that we are going to be regulating edibles locally, so we want to have a say as to what we're going to be implementing. And something else in DEH is that we also are interested in those manufacturing facilities that are going to be making concentrates. We know they're going to be using hazardous materials. We know they're going to be generating hazardous waste. So our HAZMAT program is also going to be impacted by these new edibles that are going to be produced soon. And they're already being produced, actually. A perspective from our Agricultural Weights and Measures Department is that many of the programs are really impacted. I mean, look at cultivation, certified organics, their retail nursery program, and of course, Weights and Measures. They, as we do, have a similar process where we have inspectors in the field, we conduct inspections, we work with compliance, when necessary we do enforcement. So we were looking at all these facets, but we were also looking at other things. I'm sorry. For us, something that it was very new, is very important, is to keep our inspectors safe in the field. This is an entirely new process we haven't done before. There is hesitancy probably from some inspectors and going to these facilities. So that's something that we're also going to have to look at and do. What kind of training do we need? How do we need to make sure, what do we need to do in order to make sure that our inspectors are safe when they're doing these inspections? Something else is that this is an added workload. So how are we going to manage all the complaints that we might receive? And also, how are we going to pay for all of this? Are we going to need new stuff? And how are we going to be getting cost recovery for this? You have just listened to Joe and also to Justin about just the detailed work and going back and forth, all the work that they need to coordinate, all the options that they put together to the board for changes to the ordinance. And something that they did, well, they were doing all of that. They were participating in the work group. And also they were making sure that whatever changes they were proposing, they really were in concert with the different departments and making sure that something that they wrote on the ordinance was not going to have, unanticipated consequences for another department. And you heard from Thomas, and with the Office of Strategy and Intergovernmental Affairs, what they do is they're scanning legislation all the time, what's going on, what's coming in the future, and he was able to provide that perspective to the group, and also be able to tell us about, the workshops that were coming up, information that he was finding, so we could also get that input into what we were looking at. We also have the public safety group, and for them, they're really concerned about public safety, and they're also are going to be charged with enforcement. So there's a number of things they're interested in. One of them is, probably increased use of marijuana by minors, especially now that the adult use has been approved. And so they need to be able to figure out how we're going to prevent this. They also have to look at the issue of driving under the influence. There are established limits for alcohol right now, but those don't exist for marijuana yet. So that's something else they'll need to tackle. And something else that they probably don't do now is, in households now under the adult model, they can have up to 6 plants, cultivate up to 6 plants in their own household. So how are they going to be monitoring this, and how are we going to prevent that some of these households, start with 6 and then end up with 36 or 60? So this is also going to create a big impact for that group. And lastly, I want to give you the perspective from the Health and Human Services Agency. The agency has dual role in this. They are the agency that issues the medical marijuana cards. These cards have two functions. For people that are stopped in the street, they can demonstrate that they have a medical reason why they're in possession of the substance. And they also they have an exemption from paying taxes when they buy these products. So this is probably going to continue, at least for the portion where people want to, not pay taxes when they buy a medical product. But on the other hand, with the passage of Prop 64 and the adult use, they see that there's probably going to be an increased demand for the services. They'll need to really increase their efforts in public education, trying to stop diversion of marijuana to minors, and also perhaps really also increase demands for behavioral services, for social services, and programs for prevention, treatment of addiction, etc. So those are just some of the perspectives. There are many others that we sell. For us, when we're looking at edibles, we really, truly had no idea how many different products really can be infused with marijuana. It's just staggering. What do you find when you go on the web? These are just some of the examples. So getting a line from Rebecca to end on a high note, I want to let you know that the strength of our group has really been the diversity of the group and all the different points of view that we have brought to the group so that we can analyze it, really have a comprehensive analysis of what the risks and what the issues are for us. And we all have learned a lot from being in this group. We learned about what each one of us does. Even though some of us had already worked together in other projects, this has really increased our collaboration. And also, this is just not in the work group. And now we consistently, thread when we have other projects, because we're thinking, oh, I know that that group actually can have an interest in this. So that has been very, very beneficial for us.
And it does stretch. It's like fingers. I work with a lot of the public safety group and law enforcement, and they're talking about it on their side and how it's going to affect. Anybody like spaghetti? Just curious. Who likes spaghetti? Have you ever taken a piece of spaghetti and you start, sucking it in your mouth and you think it's like this little teeny piece and all of a sudden it just keeps coming out and coming out and coming out and all of a sudden it's this enormous piece and it slaps you in the face? So this is what this is like. It's like you get a little piece of something and all of a sudden it's like, okay, now this issue's out there. But it's the way that Gloria just explained it. It just keeps coming and there's another piece and there's another issue and there's something else. And it's really managing all of these areas and knowing how to do it, knowing who to combine with, knowing what working groups, how to collaborate, doing all of these areas. And for the sake of time, we're not going to go over, we'll go skip through, I'll just show you the next 2 slides right here. Here's the next one. This is, again, all of the competencies that are demonstrated. It just goes on and on because this group is just so complex with the project that they're working on that they can't help but hit these by being successful. So why don't we go ahead and move to the next piece of this?
Okay, so is anybody overwhelmed already by the amount of moving parts that we're dealing with? Because we have some more. So as you can see, we're dealing with all of the moving parts within our organization, and I think this is a great example for us as staff of how our policy direction can evolve as we're looking at new members on the Board of Supervisors. So that's one thing that we're managing. But the other piece of it is we are one jurisdiction in a much larger region. We have 18 other cities and we have a number of tribal governments as well. And each one of them is handling this issue independently. And so one of the things that our working group has decided to do, we're monitoring all of that and we're providing we're reaching out to those jurisdictions as appropriate to let them know that we have this panel of experts and we have insight into some of these things for some of the jurisdictions that may not have those resources. So for example, the city of San Diego has medical dispensaries already in place. You could go into one today. They're looking at the recreational aspect of it. And so how would they handle cultivation? How would they handle if they wanted to manufacture marijuana products like oils and that kind of thing, concentrates. And so we've reached out to the city of San Diego to let them know what resources we currently have and what resources that we don't necessarily have authorization for at this point as they're crafting their ordinances, so they know what they're dealing with. We also have Lemon Grove and La Mesa, who in November, they passed an initiative to allow medical dispensaries in their jurisdictions. So we're reaching out to those communities as well, letting them know, if you're going to allow edibles, if that's going to be part of your regulation, DEH at this point doesn't regulate edibles. And so they have that information in their pocket to make informed decisions for their constituents and the people who live in their jurisdiction. And then we're also seeing issues with the medical marijuana, or the marijuana industry is looking at how they could push forward in other ways. So in Vista and Oceanside, there are currently ballot measures circulating petitions for signatures to try to expand whether it's medical or recreational facilities in those areas. So each one of these jurisdictions is approaching it differently, and each one of these jurisdictions could potentially be interacting with some of our departments in the group. So we're trying to get ahead of it and reach out to them and let them know, you can come to us, we can answer questions, but here's kind of where we're all at this point. And then so on top of that, we have the tribal governments they have land out in the unincorporated areas right next to some of our communities. Then they're starting to explore outdoor cultivation of marijuana on sovereign lands. And so how do we interact with all of that? How do we handle our constituents, our communities, as their neighbors are now going off and starting this new venture? And then so on top of all of that, we have the federal government. So the last administration, the last presidential administration, took an approach to marijuana because it is illegal on the federal level. They took a states' rights approach. So as long as your state had legalized at some level, whether it was medical or recreational, cannabis, they were going to say, we're going to have our hands off. As long as you're following the law in that state, we're not going to get involved. But we have a new administration with completely different policy positions and priorities on a number of things. And so if that administration decides to reverse the stance on marijuana, that's going to have an impact not only on the local businesses here, the dispensaries, the medical dispensaries that are approved, that's going to have impacts to our tribal neighbors as well. And so we're trying to keep abreast of all of these different kind of facets that are coming at us. This is a really rapidly evolving policy issue. And then the last thing I want to add is the creativity of entrepreneurs. It is just amazing how creative people can be, and the new businesses that are cropping up because of being allowed to go into this area. Fortunately, we have Colorado to look at. They're a couple years ahead of us as far as where they're going with marijuana, and so we can see some of those businesses, like for example, they have restaurants with food that they've infused with marijuana, and so you could order a sushi roll and it has marijuana in it, and that's something that they're seeing in other states. And so we're looking at that as well and trying to prepare not only our elected officials and our staff and our departments within the organization, but also to serve as a resource for our neighbors as well, who might not have access to the all of the knowledge that this group can bring.
So, Alex, it sounds like, and are you guys hearing this? I mean, it's amazing. It's like it's coming from all angles. You're like in a pressure pot. I actually watched the board meeting that you had, and it was coming from all angles. And you had the community, and you had the citizens, and you have a neighboring city that's actually already doing things, and you have all of these pressures from different areas. And so, to move this along a little bit, can we go 2 clicks, Megan? There we go. So a lot of this that Alex is talking about are these 2 things. Huge in organizational acumen, huge. I mean, it's so sensitive. No matter where you're touching, there's sensitivity all the way around it. And then problem solving, all of it is problem solving. And so it's just being in this situation. How are you guys working with your communities, talking to the city that's doing all these things? You said even other ones. La Mesa, I didn't know that you're working even with other cities that are doing this. And I'll tell you one thing, I don't care how much I love sushi, I won't go to Colorado. Not doing it. So let's go to Megan.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, Alex. That was very good.
So to bring this full circle, I mean, I've heard some amazing things today, and I've been participating in the working group since the beginning, but it even feels a little overwhelming right now just sitting here, right? And we're really not done. We have a lot of work still to do. And in fact, the state of California, different agencies at the state level are right now developing regulations. So we don't really even know what it's going to look like when those laws are implemented, because we don't have those regulations yet. So we're kind of waiting on that too. Those are supposed to be out in 2018. In addition, we don't really have board direction yet. We don't really know where we're going yet. And as you can see on this slide, there's a lot of things that have to be decided. Medical marijuana, adult use, are they going to allow deliveries? Are there going to be storefronts? What about cultivation? What about edibles? What about pesticide use? What about growing hemp, which we haven't really talked too much about, but there's a big push on the agricultural side from many growers of, hey, we want to grow hemp. So there's a lot that's still unknown. And there's a lot that we're still going to have to be working on. And I'm looking forward to it.
Good. So that concludes the second panel. What did you guys think of that? That's big. That's heavy duty. And this is what I want to conclude with. I know it was a little bit of a process going through, and I kept asking you to look at the behaviors. Well, let me tell you something. Out of all the groups that we've done so far, you know more about the behaviors than any of the other ones, because you guys are looking at them, you applied them, you know what they are. And so I want to offer this to you. This is something that'll be sent out to you afterwards. It's a leadership competency self-assessment. And so now that you're familiar with the behaviors, it's a good time to go through and just to do a self-assessment assessment, and it literally goes through every single one of them. No one's going to look at this. This is just for you, and you can assess yourself. You know, how well am I doing with this? And do I need to do some work on it? And then it has a little area on there that you can talk about coming up with a plan. If you want to talk to someone else about it, make a plan for development. I'm always happy to help you as well. So use this tool for your own development, and congratulations, you know a lot of this model. So I'm going to turn it back over to Sarah.
How about a big round of applause for the two panels? It is overwhelming to hear the various facets that each panel has presented. But I will say that I am so proud of both teams, but you have examples in every single department, in every division that you can reflect on and think about how you are applying these leadership development skills and competencies. And what I would leave you with is really the largest theme is that you are not on an island by yourself. The strength of this amazing organization is that we have a tremendous team. Whether it's in your division, your department, in the Luge Group, or throughout the enterprise, or working with our partners outside of the county organization. And the collective impact, the impact that we have, is so much more when we bring the team together. And the other facet is that it's about anticipating and what I refer to as playing the game of chess. That's the theme that you're hearing throughout the conversations here. And when you're not solely focused on your tasks and you realize that you're part of a larger team, that's exactly how you start to think of things. You're not just thinking of, I have to go to the board, so I'm going to come up with one option. You're thinking about, what if the board doesn't want to do A? What if they want to do B? What if they don't want to do B, they want to do C? Or what if they want to do A, B, and C? And that's where you're showing your commitment as a leader and not solely a person who's task-oriented. Each and every one of you is a leader for this organization, and the noblest motive is the public good. And when we keep our focus on that and also have the empathy that it takes. So when you think of the Alto Road scenario or situation, it would have been very easy to just provide the citation and say we're done with it. But the larger issue for us is that these were people's homes. Families lived here. And our obligation as public servants goes well beyond what our regulations encompass. So as you think of your work, please keep coming back to that focus and these skills that we're being taught. Last but certainly not least, I want to take a moment for us to thank the amazing team that's helped organize this. It takes a lot of work to do this. So if I could have Lindsay, Kevin, Christy was in the back. There she is. Anyone else that I'm missing?
That's good.
Great team. Really appreciate the efforts. And of course, the one and only Ann Kaye. Thank you. Have a great day and the rest of the week. Thank you for joining us.
All right.